Welcome to UFOs in a Strange Universe. I'm Ivan Hochaput. I'm 78 years old, and I've been studying UFOs and the paranormal since my first UFO sighting when I was 13 years old. I hope you enjoy my experiences and personal views on the strangeness of the UFO phenomenon in the following chapters of UFOs in a Strange Universe. Episode 1. Who am I? I'm a retired engineer. I was plant chief engineer for 3 international companies before starting my business. I owned and operated CC Design Development Co., Inc. for 41 years, have 16 patents, completed over 1,000 projects ranging from military, medical, and consumer products, listed on Caltech's website as an author on the LIGO project, which stands for Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, author of 6 books, and have an insatiable interest in life after this life, the paranormal, and UFOs. Below are my 13 UFO sightings as of 2026. My UFO experiences, Sighting 1. 13 years old. We were living at 846 Pennsylvania Avenue in what was then called Geauga Lake, Ohio. It's now been incorporated into Aurora and is between Solon and Aurora. Our house was a small 2-bedroom house where my dad expanded its kitchen and living room, added a garage and workshop. My brother and I slept in one small bedroom at the back of the house, and my mom and dad slept in the bedroom with the window toward the street. Both bedrooms had a window to the side yard. One can find the house on Google Maps. I was 13 when a flying saucer flew over our house. I had seen flying saucers in movies like Earth vs. Flying Saucers, Invaders from Mars, Forbidden Planet, and others. So I wasn't naive to UFOs, although in the 1950s, we normally didn't call them UFOs, we called them flying saucers. The term UFO was still relatively new. It was a hot summer in 1960, in the middle of the night, maybe 2 or 3 a.m. when I was woken up by a low-pitched humming sound. My eyes popped open. My brother's bed was under the window facing the side yard, and my bed was against the opposite wall. From my vantage, I could see out my brother's window from my side of the room. Along with the low-pitched humming sound, I could see our neighbor's house from the window. Their house was painted dark green, but tonight it had a strange yellow-greenish hue that I'd never seen before. There was a small tree growing next to the house that was visible on moonlit nights. There were no streetlights at the time. The streets were gravel, and there were no sidewalks. What caught my eye was a shadow that was moving against the side of the house next door where the tree stood. No car headlights could have made a shadow like that. In addition, if it was a car, I would have heard it running over the gravel road. I immediately got out of bed to look out the window so I could see what was causing the shadow of the tree move. I jumped onto my brother's bed, which then woke him up. Then I saw it. It was a disc-shaped object, moving at walking speed no more than 10 feet above the tallest trees in the neighborhood. I loudly shouted, "A flying saucer! A flying saucer!" To which my brother shouted, "Get off my bed! Get off my bed!" He rolled over, put his head under the covers and yelled again, "Get off my bed!" I stayed there, ignoring him. The flying saucer appeared to glow. It was a phosphorescent green, but it didn't glow like it was lighted. What I saw was a gap between its metallic shell and the blue-greenish glow, as if it was ionizing the air around it, like a corona discharge. This gap was about a foot wide between the blue-green color and the flying saucer. I saw no windows. The flying saucer was about 80 feet in diameter. I know this because our yard measured about 80 feet wide, and the flying saucer's diameter was that big. I only saw the underneath, so I saw no dome or top features. I watched it disappear between the tree limbs until I could not see it anymore. The next morning, I told my parents and my brother that I had seen a flying saucer, and they basically said, "Eat your breakfast." Sighting 2, 15 years old. My next sighting was in Bell, California. My parents moved from Geauga Lake, Ohio to Arizona, but my dad couldn't find work as a tool and die maker, so we went on to California, where my aunt, uncle, and my cousin lived. My parents found a house at 6503 Wilcox in Bell, California for rent, where we lived for 3 years. The house was right under the flight path of jets coming into LAX. I used to watch them in what looked like slow motion, stacked one behind the other, sometimes 4, 5, and 6 deep, all in a row gliding toward LAX. One evening about 7:30 or so, I watched a light that was right in the usual flight path. However, it was emitting a light that didn't look like landing lights. It was more like a bright star. Interestingly, It was low to the horizon, like the jets that were about to land. But instead of coming closer and lower like the jets, this light was slowing and going upward. When the light got nearly overhead, it stopped, stood still for about a minute, then took a right turn, flew for about 3 to 4 seconds, then turned abruptly at a 45-degree angle with no turn radius. It went for another 5 or 6 seconds, then it got smaller and smaller and disappeared. I thought this was very strange, but not as strange as what happened the next evening at exactly the same time. I was heading home when again I saw what appeared to be the same object. It flew for a few minutes as I watched. Again, as it got directly overhead, it stopped, took a right turn, and abruptly turned at a 45-degree angle, went up, up, and away, and disappeared in a few seconds. I thought this was so weird that the next evening I stood staring at the evening sky for nearly an hour, and guess what happened? Nothing. I was really bummed out. Sighting 3, 17 years old. I love motorcycles. I've owned 37 bikes, from my first Honda Sport Cub 110 to my 1947 Knucklehead Harley Davidson to my Goldwing Honda. These included a Bultaco Persang dirt bike, a 400cc Husqvarna Cross like the one Steve McQueen rode in the movie On Any Sunday, a Ducati, 3 Indians, among several others. One day my cousin and I rode out to Mount Wilson for a day in the wind and sun. I was 17 and he was 16. We got to Mount Wilson just before sunset. It was a beautiful sky, and we could see the sun hanging about 3 to 4 degrees off the water, looking towards Santa Monica. There was a lookout point and parking for about 20 cars. About 15 to 20 people were hanging onto the wooden fence, enjoying the view over the Los Angeles Valley. At that time, there was plenty of smog floating between trees, hills, and city buildings off in the distance. Where everyone was gazing to the right, toward the city to catch a sliver of the ocean sunset, I veered my gaze inland to see what looked like 2 objects moving side to side and up and down. They didn't move in unison. They moved erratically, one moving upward while the other downward or sideways, up, down, side to side in perfectly square angles with no turn radius. I asked my cousin to look in their direction. I said, "What do you think those objects are?" He looked a while and said, "Oh, those are helicopters." I told him that helicopters don't fly straight up and down, side to side, then stop on a dime, only to abruptly move again. I also noticed that no one was observing these objects, yet they were very noticeable, reflecting silvery metal off the sunlight. It's been my observation that many UFOs are flying or hovering around in our skies that never get noticed. Those that do take note of UFOs, or namely anything notable flying in the sky, fail to notify anyone of their sighting, not even letting friends or relatives know what they saw, for fear of ridicule. I was talking to my pool guy a month or so ago, and I brought up the subject of UFOs. He then told me about an object the size of a small plane that was moving extremely fast, came to a dead stop, reversed its direction, and then went out of sight in a split second. I asked him if he ever told anyone about this. He said, no. Sighting 4, 19 years old. When I was 19, when I took a job at Sargent Industries in Huntington Park, California, working the swing shift, which started at 5 p.m. At 9 p.m., I ate my lunch with a Mexican coworker out in the parking lot that I bought from the Roach Coach. Sometimes I would play my harmonica, and this was one of those times. I was playing Malagueña, a famous Spanish tune, when I looked due east where I saw 4 little objects moving erratically, but mostly in a straight line that was headed directly overhead. When I first saw them, they had started with a distinct oval shape and were perfectly round when they came overhead. When they got right over us, they were the size of a dime at arm's length, so I got a real good look at them. All 4 gave off a white appearance, and they were slightly glowing. They were moving faster than any jet I had ever seen flying over that parking lot. They moved about 2 to 3 times faster. I stood up to watch them disappear at about a 30-degree angle off the horizon toward the west. I got this very eerie feeling, like I wasn't supposed to see what I saw. I asked my friend if he had ever seen anything like this. He answered in his Spanish accent, "I see these all the time when I was a boy in Mexico." Being the big mouth that I am, I ran into the machine shop to tell everyone what we had seen. My friend wouldn't admit to seeing 4 UFOs and decided to stay in the parking lot. When I told of what we had seen, their response was, "What have you 2 guys been smoking out there?" I tried to convince them that we actually saw these objects, where they started from, and where they went. No way were they going to believe a snotty-nosed 19-year-old kid and a Mexican that hardly spoke English. At that time, radio talk shows were live, and most of the machinists listened to them during the half hour they had for lunch. A couple of the guys had been listening to a local talk show who received a call from one of their listeners. The host got news that 4 UFOs had touched down near the El Toro Air Force Base and had set a field on fire. They added that El Toro had sent a fighter jet after them, but could not catch them. They said that there was a lot of commotion near and around the base as people went outside because there must be something very wrong when a jet had taken off with loud afterburners rattling the neighborhood. The rest of the night, radios were all on, listening to this show, talking about UFOs. I was vindicated. The next day I looked for a headline in the Los Angeles Times about the incident. There was nothing, not even the following days. I couldn't believe there was no news coverage of this in newspapers or on TV. Interestingly, an article came out in UFO magazine the following month about this incident. I was a subscriber for many years. Sighting 5, 36 years old. Moving forward to 36 years old, a friend of mine had invited me to a jewelry show at the Santa Monica Civic Center in Santa Monica, California. Well, it wasn't totally an invitation, but a veiled invitation to help her friend load and unload his goods and tables. I had already walked the show and had stayed up late the previous night, so I was pretty tired by the time the show was winding down. I had a 1979 Econoline Ford window van that had a bed in the back. I told the exhibitor that I needed to get a bit of sleep since I was up until 3 a.m. the night before. I said I'd be back to help him load up after the show let out. I went to the parking lot, got in my van, and tried to close my eyes. Somehow, my eyes kept popping back open. I guess sleep wasn't in my cards, so I stared out the side window, which was curved enough that I could see small planes flying out of Santa Monica Airport. It was a partly cloudy sky with little wind. Just as a plane was gaining altitude between 2 small cumulus clouds, 3 UFOs in a triangle formation darted out of one cloud and disappeared into the other. I got out of my van to continue looking for the UFOs, but didn't see them. The jewelry show was coming to a close, and there were several people in the parking lot. Like the outspoken dipstick I was at that time, I stopped people to ask if anyone had seen 3 UFOs, right there, between those 2 clouds. Surprisingly, a couple of people actually believed me. Most walked way around me. Sighting 6, 44 years old. Here's another one that was written up in UFO magazine. I had rented a 1,500 square foot facility on Lomita Boulevard, where my son and I designed and manufactured military, consumer, and medical products as an engineering, product design, and development firm with light manufacturing. I showed the short article by UFO magazine to several of my yawning friends who were not impressed. I was on my way to work from Redondo Beach to my company when I spotted what I thought was a parachutist, but with no airplane in sight that he could have jumped out of. As I looked closer, I didn't see the little man dangling from cables. I kept looking at it, wondering what this thing could be. It went from over Palos Verdes to where I was in Redondo Beach in about 15 to 20 seconds, about 4 miles. I calculated its approximate speed. This means it must have been going about 360 miles per hour if it took 20 seconds. In 15 seconds, it was going 480 miles per hour. The object that I thought looked like a parachute looked more like one of those breath mints as it got closer, with white and red alternating pie sections radiating out from its center. There were about 8 to 10 of these pie sections. I estimated that it was 30 to 40 feet in diameter. As the object got closer to my car, it stopped and hung in the air. What was really strange was its black center, about 5 to 7 feet in diameter, that was difficult to look at. What I mean by this was that it looked out of focus, like looking at a mirage in the desert sun, wiggling around at its edges. I then opened my sunroof and got a very good look at it. It was about 600 to 700 feet above my car. Or Piper PA twin-engine plane that was taking off from Torrance Airport came into view. It was headed straight toward the UFO. I quickly turned left from Prospect Avenue onto Camino Real and pulled over to the curb, got out of my car, and looked up to witness a mid-air collision of a twin-engine plane and a UFO. To my surprise, the twin-engine plane was banking when I saw it, and there was no UFO in sight. I only wished that I had not gone around the corner and took my eyes off the UFO. Sighting 7, 48 years old. I was still working at my 1,500 square foot facility on Lomita Boulevard in Torrance when my wife, Rosaline, and her son Ricky were driving to the business. It was April 15th, 2000, tax day. As they drove down Lomita Boulevard, Ricky noticed a bright disc-shaped object headed toward them about 1,000 feet off the ground. Ricky described a circular object that was emitting what looked like sparks or fire-shaped projections being emitted from the front and also from the rear of the object. These plumes were purple, emitted on the leading edge, and blue/green on the trailing edge. It was moving no more than 10 to 15 miles per hour. Rosaline and Ricky pulled in front of the building, quickly parked, and ran to the front door. It was a Saturday, and I kept the doors locked on weekends. I was in my office working when I heard Rosaline shout through the mail slot, "Quick, get your camera, a UFO!" Rosaline was never a prankster. What she said was always what was on her mind. No embellishments, no hype. I jumped out of my chair, grabbed my video camera, attached a 10x telephoto lens on the body, and went out into the parking lot. With a 10x lens, it would be difficult to get a steady shot of anything, so I laid down on the paved parking lot, squeezed my elbows against my chest to get some footage of this UFO. It had climbed pretty high, and by that time, I was only able to get about 10 seconds of it after finding it in the sky using the telephoto lens. However, the 10 seconds proved to be astounding when I did some photo analysis of the object. The UFO was going westward, toward the ocean, and against the wind. Therefore, it was not any sort of lighter-than-air object like a balloon. It had no lifting surfaces, wings, or anything else. It was circular when looking up and had started as an oval when Ricky first saw it. The purple and bluish colors didn't become evident until after I analyzed the object on my computer, as neither I or Rosaline were able to make out these colors as described by Ricky's keen little 13-year-old eyes. That's the age I saw my first UFO too. The computer photo analysis revealed some astonishing result. First, I was able to ascertain the shape of the UFO from various computer programs solarizing. Its shape produced a bulbous center hump, which was based on the shape of its terminator, made from several computer captures from the front to rear of the craft. I did some histograms, solarization, photo eroding, highlight tones, embossing, edge enhancements, various hue mapping, and several other enhancements of one of the best frame of the video. Based on these images, I was also able to clearly see the purple leading edge protrusions and the blue-green trailing edge protrusions using hue mapping as Ricky had described them. Hue mapping also clearly showed that the craft was either heating or cooling the sky ahead of its direction. I did not own a FLIR at that time, so I could only determine that the air was a different temperature based on hue mapping. This change in temperature indicated this area was about 2 times larger than the craft itself. Enhancing contrast with solarizing showed that the object seemed to have a halo-like ring around its outer diameter. This reminded me of my first UFO sighting, where the phosphorescent glow had about a foot or so between the object's metallic skin and the beginning of the glowing ring around it. Other image enhancements included modifications such as highlight mid-tone and sharpening, frame stretched histogram, enhanced contrast low brightness, and many others. An interesting anomaly from these enhancements were when I compared several images I had gotten off the internet that showed the exact, and I mean exact same colors seen in these internet photos as the colors captured with my UFO images. It's my belief that these colors have something to do with how some of these craft are manipulating the surrounding air, matter, or maybe even space-time. It must be noted that not all craft captured from internet images display these colors. Therefore, it's my guess that not all UFOs are using the same mode of propulsion. Sighting 8, 58 years old. This sighting occurred just above our 10,500 square foot building we purchased at 13701 Gramercy Place, Gardena, California. We sold the building to our neighbor, Southwest Offset Printing, in 2018. I often refer to this building as having 12,500 square feet. That's because it had a 2,000 square foot mezzanine that the city of Gardena wanted me to tear down as it was not approved by the city. One day the city inspector came by and told me, "I've decided to approve your building." Bless his heart. As of August 6, 2025, this address still shows up as Ivanhoe Books on Google Maps. Close, but no cigar. None of this is correct. My business was CC Design Development Inc., a product design and development company with light manufacturing. A Google search also had a reference to my nephew, who has Asperger's syndrome, as the president. I have no idea how things on the internet can get facts so screwed up. Moving on. I was 58 then, and our neighbor's company, Southwest Offset Printing, had dug up our front yard. This was so they could add power lines for a large Heidelberg printing press they were installing in a building they had purchased behind ours. I had gone outside at around 8 p.m. to look at the digging they had done. I was looking around when something caught my peripheral vision. I looked upward to catch a black helicopter with no markings on it, hovering about 6 to 8 feet above my building, right between my building and Southwest Offset Printing's building. I stood there staring at it, wondering what a helicopter could be doing there at this time of evening day. Now I hope you're wondering how the hell it was that I didn't notice before it caught my peripheral vision. I'm sure everyone knows that helicopters are extremely noisy. When they are just a few feet above a building, the wind blows like a tornado, a hurricane for those that live in Florida. And they have a big rotor blade on top and a little one called a tail rotor at the rear to keep it from spinning on its axis. When a helicopter is that low, one should be able to see lights of instruments on the overhead panel, such as warning lights, caution lights, fuel indicator lights, etc. But the windows were blacked out. I was then baffled when I realized that this helicopter was totally silent. No leaves or dust was stirring, not even the leaves on the trees that were in our front yard. I could not see any lights on the overhead panel. It was as if the windows were painted black. What then disturbed me was that this helicopter had no tail rotor, and the main rotor was spinning so slowly that I could watch the tips of the blades as they swung overhead. I watched it for at least a minute and a half when it suddenly began to move forward. Also, in order for a helicopter to move, it pitches forward, allowing the main rotor to pull the air into it from the direction it needs to go. However, this helicopter did not pitch forward, it simply moved in a forward direction with no pitching whatsoever. This motion was surreal, as it seemed to move forward with no apparent acceleration, from 0 to about 3 to 5 miles per hour, instantly. It moved over my building, where I could not see it anymore. Trying to keep it in vision, I ran to the side of the building to see where it was going. When I got around to the side, the helicopter had just vanished. It was nowhere to be seen. I tried to recap what I had just seen. It was one of the most bizarre things that had ever happened to me. Note that I said, one of the most bizarre things. Again, as outspoken as I am, most people that I tell this story to listen with glazed eyes and mostly never ask any more about it, offering no thoughts or ideas about it either. I do have one friend that's heard this story several times. One day, while recapping on the story, he mentioned that as many times as he's heard me tell what happened, it's never changed one bit. This at least made me feel a little better. Sighting 9, 62 years old. Moving forward, I was now 62 on a cruise ship off the coast of Argentina. My wife and I have had the unique opportunity to travel all over the world. It's been a great life. We were by the pool, outside looking up at the stars, when we spotted what I thought was a bright satellite. After watching for a while, it abruptly took a 90-degree turn. If you ever see a light in the sky take a 90 or even a 45-degree abrupt turn, you can assume that's a UFO, or at least an SFO, a strange flying object. I know it was not a satellite, an airplane, or a flying fish. There were many people on the deck, and no one paid attention to the light. I've said this often, that it's my belief that since we have been indoctrinated into believing that UFOs don't exist, there is little to cause people to scan the skies in hopes to see one. Hence, most people simply never see them. Sighting 10, 64 years old. I was getting older and still peering upward whenever I could. I was 64 when Rosaline and I were walking back from one of our favorite pizza and beer places, about a mile and a half from our house. Something caught my eye moving eastward. At first, I thought it was a Chinese lantern moving with the wind coming off the ocean. However, it didn't have that reddish hue from the light of a candle. It was quite high, and I couldn't tell whether it could be a bright satellite, space shuttle, or what. When it made that unusual, abrupt, right-angle turn in the sky, I knew it was not a satellite, a Chinese lantern, or an airplane. Sighting 11, 72 years old. We sold the building in Gardena in 2010 to our neighbor, Southwest Offset Printing. At 71 years old, we decided to move to Hemet, California. We had plenty of money from our Redondo Beach home and the sale of the Gardena building. We got rid of our 9 pain-in-the-ass houses in Kansas City and moved into a ranch-style house with pool, 4-car garage, half-acre lot, and 3,000 square feet, which we populated with 2 of the most precious putty tats we could ever have. After 7 years enjoying the cool, clear water of our pool, watching the skies, and sipping on great glasses of wine, it's a great retirement. I don't get in the pool much anymore after 2 strokes and several mini strokes. But for the first few years, I would swim on my back and marvel at the beautiful stars in the dark nighttime sky. The Milky Way was clearly visible, and I would point out Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, and other celestial objects to Rosaline. There were no streetlights on our street, and they added them after a couple of years. Our neighbor has strung lights to light up their yard, so we now have light pollution. But it's still a very good retirement. I'm so sorry I sold my 8-inch Celestron telescope during our estate sale of the building. We had a company do an estate sale called Integrity Estates. As it turned out, this company had no integrity whatsoever. The owner's ex told me that this woman took my expensive 3D laser printer home like it was free. There were tons of items, clothing, tools, items from cockpits of jet fighters, personal items made by my uncle and my dad that I could not account for. I had suffered from several mini-strokes during that time and was not in good straits. After moving to Hemet, I suffered 2 major strokes. I've recovered enough to start writing again. I decided to put this on YouTube instead of writing another book. But this chapter is about my UFO sightings. This sighting is a bit anticlimactic. This bright light, initially coming from the west, took a very abrupt right-angle turn toward the south, went for about 10 seconds, and took another abrupt left turn to the east. See, just a little dot. But again, planes, satellites just move like this. Sighting 12, 76 years old. Now for my last 2 UFO sightings. I was swimming on my back, looking upward watching jet planes, helicopters going from Camp Pendleton to March Air Force Base, satellites, and every so often the space shuttle. We once saw around 23 or 24 of Elon Musk's Starlink satellites, which at first I thought were UFOs. They were really cool. I was watching what I thought was a satellite, however it was moving south to north, which I had never seen satellites moving in that direction before. I watched it for several minutes when it turned west, then east, then back west and east again. All these were right-angle turns, each about 10 seconds apart. It zigged, then zagged 4 times, then went up, up and away. Sighting 13, 77 years old. And last but not least, was another interesting and different sighting. Rosaline and I were watching TV when an orange light flew past the window, which is to the left of our TV. At 77, I was still very much aware of movement in my peripheral vision. I jumped up out of my chair, jumped as quickly as I could since I really can't jump anymore, and wobbled to the window as fast as I could. It was a very bright object, going from bright orange to red, pulsating back and forth. I quickly, or as fast as I could, went out our back door to get a better look at this object. As I watched it climb upward, another one came up from behind a large hill to the southwest of us. It was exactly like the first one. About 10 seconds later, a third one came from behind the hill. That's when I went back inside and got my binoculars, then went back outside. What I saw was a disc-shaped object, flying in a south to north direction. I estimate their speed to be about 40 to 50 miles per hour and accelerating to hundreds of miles per hour as they moved upward, to disappear out of sight at about a 45-degree angle off the horizon. They could have been accelerating much faster than this. In all, we observed 9 of these objects, all following in the same path. What were all these objects I've seen over my lifetime, and where did they come from? These instances, among thousands that have been seen and interacted with, that have been assimilated and documented, clearly indicate our inability to understand the strangeness of our universe.